Hi everyone, I'm the Parabox, and in this video we're going to see if we can create a complete creature from the blocking stage all the way to the final render in a single modeling session. I'll show you what the process was like and some of the techniques I use in my workflow. This video was recorded during a live streaming session as part of a 20-day daily Blender modeling challenge that I'll also be uploading to the channel. And if you're interested in seeing the details, I'll also leave the model files available for you to download completely free of charge. You'll find the link down in the description below. So with that said, let's take a look at how the process of creating this creature went. You can see the concept art in the upper right corner. It's a sort of dinosaur mount. And to start modeling it, what I do first is use very basic shapes, basically spheres, and deform them in sculpt mode to create the main body parts of my character. I start with a primary volume for the body and try to give it a silhouette similar to the reference. For the side limbs, I duplicate a sphere, add the mirror modifier, and stretch it to begin creating parts like the thighs, calves, and feet. And at the beginning, with very low resolution, I focus on defining my character's silhouette. Normally, during this phase, which is the blocking stage, what I do is take one of the body parts I've already created and duplicate it to create the next one so I can move faster. In this case, I took part of the legs and duplicated it to make the hands, simply so I wouldn't have to keep adding new objects all the time. Once I have them in position, I join them into a single object and apply a remesh so they become one solid piece, always at a very low resolution so I can keep control over the shape. Here, for the fingers, I'm going to add more shapes, in this case a UV sphere, which I'll stretch into a slightly longer shape, and then duplicate it to create each of the toes. I make small adjustments to the silhouette here, always using the reference as my guide. I keep adjusting the sizes and lengths, constantly orbiting around the model to make sure it looks good from every angle. Once I have a silhouette that's more or less close, I can join all of these shapes together and apply a remesh so they become a single piece of geometry. This is a gradual process focused on the silhouette. I create the parts separately, and when I feel they're solid enough, I combine them into a single object and apply a remesh so they merge into one piece of geometry. You'll see this process repeated throughout the creation of this entire model. Now, when I want to start adding a bit more detail and define my character's forms a little better, I mainly use the crease brush to create these marks on the surface. This helps emphasize the edges of my character's main features. So I begin by doing it in broad strokes, and later, once I have more resolution, I'll refine it further. Now that I have this initial blocking, I'm going to add the eyes. Adding the eyes also helps us a lot when defining the facial features. Normally, whenever we integrate a new part into a model, we'll need to iterate and modify everything around it so all the objects fit together and look harmonious. In this case, for example, I'm adding detail to the eye sockets, so they interact properly with the eyes we just added. Alright, now that I have a fairly solid base for the legs, I'm going to join them together and go through the same remesh process. Then I start adding more of the elements my character has, in this case, the sleeping bag on its back. I place it here first as a simple cylinder, just to guide how everything around it should be adjusted. I'm also going to add the little backpack, which is simply a cube with a bevel modifier to soften the edges. This is all still part of the blocking stage, where we just want to have all the model's elements in place and establish the main silhouette. We'll add the details later. The same goes for the strap around the tail. For the strap, I'll add the shrink wrap modifier so it sticks to the body's surface, allowing these objects to interact nicely with each other. Then I add the solidify modifier to give it thickness, followed by a bevel modifier to soften the edges. I keep refining, and once I feel the shape is solid, I perform another remesh with a higher resolution to allow for a little more detail. We keep refining it little by little. Looking back at the concept, I noticed that the fingers have a slightly more triangular silhouette. It's always extremely important to keep checking the reference concept, so this is a constant exercise in observation. Here, I start hinting at some of my character's anatomical features, for example, the tendons that connect the fingers. Then I continue refining the features. Alright, for the scales on the neck, what I do is create a plane, subdivide it, and add the shrink wrap modifier and solidify modifier so it sticks to the surface of the skin underneath. This way, I can create these plate-like shapes that sit on top of the body. I finished modeling the first plate based on the reference, and after that, I simply duplicate it and adjust it so it interacts nicely with the rest of the model. I'm going to do this 3 times since there are 3 plates. Now I'll continue by modeling another one of the character's props, in this case the saddle where the rider would sit. It's just some very simple vertex modeling, so there's not much to highlight here. I adjust the thickness and once again make additional adjustments in sculpt mode. This is something I do constantly. I often model with vertices first and then adjust the silhouette in sculpt mode, mainly using the grab brush. Alright, now for the wings, I simply take a plane, subdivide it a bit, and adjust it to match the silhouette we have in the reference. Likewise, I adjust the joint and make sure both objects interact nicely with each other. I add a solidify modifier to give it some thickness and then a subdivision modifier to smooth it out. Then we continue iterating on the shape of the joint. Alright, now that I have almost all the parts finished, I'm going to start painting my model. Many times it helps to have the model's colors during the process because it allows us to compare it better with the reference and gives us a better overall impression. I do this entire painting process in sculpt mode using very basic brushes, simply a flat paintbrush. At this stage, I'm only doing a color blocking pass. Later, once the model has more detail, I'll also add more detail to the colors. Alright, here I'm using a grid fill to create the inside part of the saddle, and in sculpt mode, I also adjust it a little more to fit everything around it. I add a few modifiers to this metallic part, basically a bevel modifier and a subdivision modifier, which are more than enough to make a rigid object look good. Then I finish the tail using the same technique I used for the wings. Alright, now for the sleeping bag, I'm going to create a spiral here by extruding vertices and then extrude it along the x-axis. Then I add some thickness with the solidify modifier and subdivide it so it looks smoother. I also add a few support loops so it doesn't look too round, adjust the modifiers, and add the geometry needed so it closely matches the sleeping bag in the concept. I'm also going to paint the color on the remaining objects. These are the objects I've added so I can see how everything looks together in context. Now I'm going to add these little claws that I still needed to put on my character. They're small claws on the hands and on a few other areas like the tips of the wings. Whenever I add new objects, I always have to adjust the object underneath so they integrate nicely with each other. This is an extremely important concept in 3D. Objects shouldn't simply be placed there. They should integrate naturally with everything around them. And naturally, I also adjust the shape of each of these new objects so they fit nicely with the rest. Most of these objects are repeated on the other side, so I'm going to add the mirror modifier. Alright, for the claws on the back feet, I'm simply going to duplicate the one I already made, move it into position on the toes of the back feet, adjust it, and duplicate it for each toe. Since we had already created this other object and it has a similar shape to the claw, we can simply reuse it. Reusing objects we've already created speeds up the modeling process a lot, so whenever possible, try to do this consistently. Alright, here I'm going to paint this remaining part of the tail, and now let's create the character's pupils. I'm simply going to select this circular group of faces on the eye sphere and paint it a different color. Then I also adjust everything around it so it integrates nicely with the rest of the head. And now we practically have all the parts of our character. Alright, so now I'm going to move on to the lighting and some basic materials, but this is only to get an idea of how everything looks. This won't be the final result. I simply like working in layers, because once we place our character into a scene, for example with lighting, we can spot details that could still be improved. The material I'm creating basically consists of taking the colors we painted in sculpt mode, using the color attribute node, and plugging them into the base color. And by the way, if you're enjoying this video and you'd like to learn how to create your own models from scratch, I have a very comprehensive Blender course for beginners. We cover organic modeling, hard surface modeling, modifiers, digital sculpting, materials, and a final project where we create a complete character from start to finish. So if you'd like to learn Blender with a solid foundation so you can model with confidence, you'll find the link in the description. Then I'm going to add a curved plane so my character can stand on a surface. This way, it doesn't look like it's floating in the air. And this will help a lot when it comes to the final render, so it really feels like the character is integrated into the scene. Then, for my character's material, I'm going to add a little ambient occlusion and mix it with the base color. As you can see here, this adds a bit more contrast, and I set the blend mode to multiply. That way, we're going to help the volumes read better and make the material feel more dynamic overall. I'm going to improve the lighting by adding a couple more lights. And here, I'm basically trying to play with a temperature contrast by placing one orange light and one blue light coming from different directions. And here, at this point, after almost 2 hours of work, we finished the streaming session. But a little later, I decided to finish this model by adding a few more details. Basically, I went through the different parts of my character, checking everything carefully and looking for areas that needed more detail. For example, the little claws at the bottom needed to be sharpened so they would feel more believable. And likewise, I adjusted the little fingers around them. I adjusted the position of the eyes a little more. I added a few details that I didn't notice during the previous session, like these little horns. To detail the padded part of the chair, what I did was subdivide this geometry a bit and extrude a few groups of faces to generate volume. This creates the impression that I'm building a padded silhouette. And after that, in sculpt mode, I'm going to adjust the surface a little. I add the smooth modifier to soften the transition a bit so it looks a little more natural. And once I'm happy with that, I'm going to add these little golden studs that are part of the concept. Now, to add some detail to the sleeping bag, I'm simply going to duplicate it and scale it along the normals to create an inner silhouette. Then I change its color and adjust it a little. That way, it looks like it's made from a 2-layer piece of fabric. And now, for the stitching, what I do is simply extract an edge loop from the sleeping bag geometry and convert it into a curve. Then I'm going to generate a sequence of elongated cubes that will act as the thread. I simply stretch a cube, smooth it with subdivision, add the array modifier, and finally the curve modifier, so it follows the shape of the curve we just created. I make sure to select the correct axis, and now it follows the shape of the curve we extracted from this sleeping bag. I add the mirror modifier and also adjust the mirror modifier on the object underneath, and I adjust the array spacing so the stitching feels a little more believable. Then I keep adding the props from my reference. At this point, I'm still missing a few straps around the sleeping bag. I make them simply by extruding a circle and adding the solidify and bevel modifiers. And finally, the only thing left is the details on this little backpack we have on the sides. What I'm going to do here is simply separate a few faces from this cube. I'm going to add a few support loops to make it hold its shape better. Then I'll keep extracting faces to create these leather flaps. I adjust them manually, also in sculpt mode so they feel a little more organic. I keep extracting all the flaps I need. And to create the leather trim that goes all around the bag, what I do is duplicate the little backpack, apply a few subdivisions, and start selecting these edge loops. I duplicate them, separate them, and convert them into curves. And once they're converted into curves, I can give them a little thickness using the curve properties themselves. That way, we quickly generate this trim around all the flaps of the little backpack. At this point, I'm also going to switch render engines. I'm switching to Cycles, which is Blender's most powerful render engine, because I want a very high quality render. And I'm going to finish the remaining objects. I think the only thing I'm still missing is this buckle that goes on the straps at the back of the sleeping bag. I'm going to place it in the correct position. Then I duplicate it for the strap on the other side. And I make sure they end up slightly asymmetrical instead of sitting in exactly the same position, because these kinds of asymmetries make our model feel more dynamic. I'm going to sculpt a few details into the leather surface of the backpack to give it a bit of texture and make the material feel richer. And now that I finally have all the props for my character and all their corresponding pieces, I'm going to select the entire body, convert it into a mesh, combine everything into a single final geometry, and then apply a remesh. That way, everything becomes connected into a single geometry, leaving me with one organic object. And I can smooth the entire character, allowing all these pieces to blend together nicely. And after doing that, I can finish refining the surface details of my model. For example, here I'm going to finish defining these scales. I mainly do that with the crease brush. Likewise, here inside the mouth. I want to sharpen it so my character's features feel much more polished, and I keep doing it wherever it's needed. Normally, this requires inspecting the model and orbiting around it from every angle, looking for the places that need these adjustments. Alright, I finished making a few paint corrections. For example, here a little bit of the yellow color from below had bled through, so I fixed that kind of thing. And the last thing I'm going to do is add an armature to pose my character. Here I added the quadruped rig that comes included with the free Rigify add-on. And I'm going to adjust its legs so they match the legs of my character, trying to line up the joints in the same positions. If there are any extra bones I don't need, I simply delete them. We only need the main spine, the legs, and the front joints. And I finish adjusting the position of where my character's main spine should be. And that's it. Once everything is in position, I'm going to parent the entire rig to the geometry using automatic weights. And that was a risky decision because this model has almost 1 million polygons. So it becomes extremely heavy, and I was hoping Blender wouldn't crash. But in the end, everything parented correctly, and the rig worked perfectly. So the only thing left here was to take all these other objects, like the claws, and parent each one directly to its corresponding bone. That way, they move together with the rest of the rig. And now I'm going to start posing my model. Basically, I want a slightly more dynamic pose, a little closer to the one in the concept, where the character looks ready to start running. As you can see, I still have to finish parenting a few objects. For example, the ones on the head, I have to parent them directly to the bone. And now I can finally finish posing my character, trying to make it feel more dynamic and alive, even if it's only a subtle pose. Alright, now I'm going to add a little more depth to the material. I do this by blending the color I painted with curvature details extracted from the pointiness node. I also add the corrective smooth modifier because the rig is creating a few artifacts that become noticeable with the curvature, and I finish blending it with ambient occlusion. You can see this entire process in detail in my video about creating professional materials for organic creatures. I also add a small amount of noise to give the skin more detail and make it feel like a rougher texture, similar to a lizard's skin. And I connect that to a bump node. That's what creates the impression of roughness. Using that same noise node, I'm also going to create some variation in the roughness, so the skin surface looks a little shinier and more dynamic. And finally, to make the character feel a little more cohesive, I'm going to blend everything at the end with a flat color, but with a very low influence. That way, everything feels a little more unified in the end. And the last node I connect is an HSL node that I'll use to control the saturation a little more, because overall, I want everything to end up just a touch more saturated. Now all that's left is to finish adjusting the lighting. I'm going to add an HDRI image to make the render a little more dynamic and give it better reflections. I adjust the direction and intensity of the lights. And of course, I add a camera so I can render the final image. I adjust the proportions, and with that, we're ready for the render. One extra thing I like to do, since Blender's default renders tend to look a little washed out, is apply the medium-high contrast look. That way, the final result is a little more saturated and vibrant than Blender's default output. This is the final result of our model. As you saw, the asymmetry in the pose and the lighting contrast gave it the life we were looking for. I hope you enjoyed the video, and if you liked this process, make sure to subscribe because there are more models and creatures coming. Don't forget that you can download the file from the description so you can explore the model yourself. And I'll see you in the next video.